Hello. The stories on my channel are all written by me and are all works of fiction, though some of them may be based on real events or real characters. I hope you enjoy this one, and thanks for dropping in.
To See Forever, a short story by Kevin M.
At the end of Cwm Road, Glascoed, South Wales, and near the summit of the hill, you'll find the gated lane to Cherry Orchard. The gate itself is hardly noticeable, painted green and being warmly embraced by the wild grass borders that edge the two never-to-meet concrete tracks of the lane that lead to the white-walled, pale blue-trimmed cottage. The lane, rising as it arcs to the bend to the right, passes the little gateway to Gusgog Heaven, a field lined with more never-to-meet rows, this time of gooseberry bushes. The long, low-hanging branch of the white ash tree the little wooden gate is hinged to bears the scars of 8 years of children's playtime. The rope swing hanging from it still swaying after the latest pirate boarded a Spanish galleon and looted it of its furry emerald treasure. Well, a few yet to ripen goosgogs. Past the gate and further up the bank to the right is the old corrugated tin sheet barn. Inside, half hay bales, half stable, and outside a 100% mix of mud and cowpat, a quagmire that had claimed many an ill-fitting welly. Access to the barn is through a large, nearly new galvanised steel gate, a gate seemingly with a mind of its own, that would swing back on you if you didn't give it the respect its weight and sloped hanging hinges demanded. With this in mind, the children thought it safer to climb through it, or, as they were now growing up, over it. And it is through this gate that you also enter the cherry orchard itself. Half an acre of cherry trees standing on parade with fruit, soon to be picked, hanging like ruby baubles from the tangled branches. 2 of the trees, up against the wooden fence at the back of the orchard, doubled as goalposts in this South Wales rugby haven. As you carry on past the cherry orchard to your right and the back of the cottage on your left, you come to the turning point at the end of the lane. There is no other option but to follow the well-worn tracks and U-turn to face back down the lane, or park your car by the gateway that leads to the old barn, now doubling as a chicken coop, and the Massey Ferguson TE20 that stands sentry-like alongside it. There is another parking space situated next to the ground-level kitchen window that looks up to both the barn and the cherry orchard. And through it, there at her newly installed, sparkling stainless steel sink, stands Mrs. Price. The phone rings. She does not answer. She stands by the sink, drying her marigolds, and listens. If it rang off after the 3rd ring, she knew John was on his way home from the BAE. If there was a 4th ring, then she would answer, Little Mill 271. It stops on the 3rd ring. Stephen, Christine, she calls. Your father's on his way home. Dinner will be 20 minutes. Come and wash your hands. Christine responds immediately. Dragging her tiny tears behind her, she runs from the apple orchard at the front of the house, scattering chickens as she goes, past the once used, now sealed water well, into the kitchen and on through to the black and white tiled bathroom. Tucking her pink gingham-clad doll under her arm, she briefly dribbles the hot water over her fingers and, each hand in turn, swipes her fingers lightly across the came, just enough to catch the scent. Rinsing her now washed hands again, she admires her new haircut in the mirror. Just like Mummy, she thinks to herself. She drives her hand on the fluffy white towel and leaves it dirt-stained on the bathroom floor. Proudly showing Mummy how clean her hands now are, Christine peeks out of the kitchen door in hope of seeing her brother, just so she can revel in the feeling of triumph at being the first to be ready for dinner. There is no sign of him. Stephen? 10 minutes, lovely, called Vibe Price. Still no sign. Over in the barn, on top of the highest hay bales stacked there, Stephen lay on his back and stared through the hole in the corner of the roof at the moon, strangely visible in the clear late afternoon sky beyond. He could not believe that 2 men were bouncing about on the moon all those miles away as he lay watching. Was it really made of cheese like Dad had told him? Mind you, Dad had told him that Santa and Jesus were real. They weren't. Stephen was nearly 9 and knew everything, except how to use a slide rule. Does anyone know how to use a slide rule? He thought. He hooked his thumbs inside his rainbow-coloured elasticated belt with the S-hook buckle and thought what it must be like to be on the moon looking back at the Earth. Were the astronauts watching him watch them? "Stephen Price!" came the next shout. The fact his mum had used his surname meant he was close to trouble. He jumped from upper bale to lower bale, trapezed his way into the first cherry tree, and dropped onto the galvanised gate below. As he crossed the lane, he looked down it to see the steel-grey Austin A30 chugging its way up the hill toward him. "Dad's home," he said to himself. He vaulted the bars that spanned the gaps between the turrets in the small wall that circuited the front garden, and sprinted through the kitchen, full of mince and cabbage-scented steam, to the bathroom. He threatened his hands with water, no need for soap when you're in a hurry, and dried them on his khaki shorts as he ran back to the kitchen, sliding into his seat at the table just in time to see the back door open and his father step in. "2 minutes," said Vi. "Righto," replied her husband. He hung his worn rucksack on the hook on the back of the door, placed his new black boots on the homemade wooden rack marked "Boots," and went to wash. Making a mental note of the dry soap and the towel on the floor, he smiled. As he sat down to the dinner already waiting on a plate at his place at the kitchen table, John lifted and kissed the back of his wife's hand. She smiled back. "Don't let it go cold," she said. And he didn't. After dinner, the family retired to the sitting room. Vi picked up her knitting, Stephen picked up his well-worn copy of Goal, and John picked up Christine and held her above his head. "Hello, beautiful," he said. She, uncontrollably giggling like she did every time her daddy flew her above his head, said, "Again, Daddy." My own fault, he thought. "John, she's just had her dinner," said Vi without looking up from her needles. Settling her down on the settee next to him, he left his little girl to play with her doll a little more before bath and bedtime. Stephen watched his dad press the last of his St. Bruno into the bowl of his pipe and lift it to his mouth. Stroking his thumb across the flint wheel of his World War II US Zippo lighter, marked Army Postal Service Cairo, Egypt, a gift from a Marine just after the end of the war, he gave 4 quick puffs to tempt the resultant flame down into the chamber to light the moist tobacco. He took a deep breath, stretched out his aching legs, and sighed. "Dad," said Stephen, "why did you say the moon was made of cheese?" "Who said it isn't?" he replied. "Well, I was thinking about it, and, well, if it is made of cheese, why didn't it melt when the rocket landed on it?" John, impressed by his son's logic, but not wanting to get embroiled in such a conversation, said, "You'll just have to write to Mr. Armstrong and ask him." Taking this idea on board, Stephen rushed upstairs and penned his letter. Once done, he would jump into bed, light on. He was afraid of the dark. But that was 3 months ago, and there was still no reply from Mr. Armstrong. Maybe he was busy, thought Stephen, or maybe he got bitten by some kind of moon bug and he's turning into a green alien. Friday night sci-fi films on HTV had a way of sparking a child's imagination. Happy he was on the right track, Stephen nestled back into his favourite hay bale, put his hands behind his head, and once again stared into the night sky, unspoiled by any light pollution out here in the middle of this small somewhere. As he stared, his eyes were drawn to an oddly flickering star to the right. It looked, he thought, like the light in the dining room when the bulb was about to blow. And with that, the star disappeared. Stephen took a minute to take in what he had just witnessed. A star had just stopped being a star, he thought. He stood up, as if by getting that little bit closer, he would be able to see it again, balanced uneasily on the teetering bale and scanned for it. There were no clouds in the sky to hide it, and he could still see the moon and the other stars. So where had it gone? Had the black bit of space just covered it up? Maybe the South Wales Electricity Board had cut its supply like they did to Mr. and Mrs. Prosser when they didn't pay their bill again, he mused. Or had it died? The thought of it dying troubled him. The only other thing he had seen die was his dog. He had cried for days, unable to accept that he would never see Bingo again. Death, he had decided, was not a nice thing. He sat back down on the bale. If a star could die, could the same thing happen to the sun? And if so, where would the daylight come from? His eyes moistened again, and he ran to his father. John was in his workshop running his new file over his old scythe. When he heard the sound of his crying son running to him, he got down on one knee and held out his arms that had comforted all his family at one time or another. Crashing into his dad's arms, Stephen was immediately hoisted into the air, arms clinging to his dad's neck, legs dangling 3 feet above the worn, cobbled floor. In between sniffs and the burbling noise only a shivering chin can make, he blurted out his story about the dead star. "It's gone, Dad," he said. "The star is gone. Is that all there is, Dad? When you die, is that all there is? Nothing? Blackness?" His heart was breaking. John turned and, easing the scythe to one side, placed his son on the workbench and picked up his already filled pipe. Stephen relaxed at the reassuring mixed smell of smouldering tobacco and sulphur from a newly struck match. "Come here," said John, wiping the last of the tears away with the buttonless cuff of his shirt. "First of all, you need to understand what you have just seen. You have just seen something that happened tens of thousands of years ago, but..." Stephen settled a little more as he looked his father in the eye. "Thousands of tens of years ago, Dad," he said. "Exactly," said John with a grin. "So how is it that I've only just seen it?" "Well," said John, "everything has a speed. Tortoises are really slow, but a car is really fast. And light is the fastest thing there is, and even though it's really fast, it still takes time to get from one place to another. Like the car getting from the bottom of the lane to the top." John took a couple of puffs on his pipe as he pondered how best to explain the death of the star. After all, it was the thought of its death that had unsettled the lad. "What you saw was only the end of that part of the star's life. You see, everything has an energy, and when the bit that produces the energy stops being, well, the energy itself keeps on going. Come here." John crossed the workshop and took his torch from the top shelf. Picking up a crystal lampshade he had promised Vi he would repair, some 2 years or so ago, he sat himself on the workbench next to his son. "Right," he said. "This torch is the star, okay? And when I turn it on like this, the light is the energy it is sending out. Okay so far?" Stephen nodded. "Now, if I shine the light on the door jamb, what do you see?" Stephen looked. His dad had asked him a question and he felt self-imposed pressure to get the answer right. I can see the light on the latch hook on the door frame," he said, hoping the answer was correct. "That's right, you can. But..." John moved his eye line to match that of his son. "What can you see outside, by the tractor?" Stephen peered outside. He wasn't sure what he should be looking for until... "I can see the light on the reflector at the back of the tractor, Dad." "That's right," said John. "So although part of the light stops by the latch, the rest of it is shining on the reflector or on the grass behind it, and some of it is going into the sky, where nothing can stop it." "Time for bed, Stephen," came the call from the kitchen. "5 minutes, love," called back John as he picked up his lampshade. "Now, what happens to the light when I shine it here, on the crystals?" Stephen's eyes widened as the torchlight hit its target. The light refracted and stars filled the workshop. "They're everywhere, Dad, everywhere." tears, only this time of joy, welled in his eyes as he reached out to the light. "What do you think?" asked John. "I think—" Stephen paused as he did just that. "I think that if the energy from this little light can fill this room, then a big light, like a star, can fill space. And if, like you said, everything is made of energy, then maybe when we die, our energy can fill a room or our house. And, Dad, perhaps when our energy gets set free, it just keeps going too, to everywhere." He tried to look up when he heard an odd, snorting, croaking kind of a sound coming from his father. Instead, John pulled his son close to his chest and hugged him tight. "Oh, I hope you're right, son. I do hope you're right." Lifting Stephen to the floor and booting his bum in the direction of the door, he swiftly wiped away his own tears. "You heard your mum. Go on. Bedtime. I'll be there to tuck you in a minute. Just gotta fix this lampshade." "Dad, can I sleep with my light off tonight, please?" "Yes, son. As long as you turn it back on tomorrow." "As long as you turn it back on tomorrow."